Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if the Darien Scheme succeeded. What exactly was the Darien Scheme? The Darien Scheme was an attempt in order to colonize a specific part of what is known today as Panama, in the so-called Darien region. Scotland wanted to grab this part of the Spanish Empire, and their idea was to not establish a canal, but to establish a land route that would connect the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean together. Scotland already chose a name for this part of Panama and wanted to name it New Caledonia. What an original name! Moreover, the Company of Scotland was backed by 20% of all the money that was circulating within Scotland. Once this adventure failed, it led to a financial disaster for the Kingdom of Scotland. The whole adventure took like 2 years, and in 1700 Spain took those parts of Panama back, and you can imagine what went on in Scotland. Some people in Scotland made the English for the failure responsible, while others thought that another scheme could work. But if already 20% of all the money circulating in your kingdom is taken out, well, you know what would help best? Doing again the same, right? So at the end, the king declined to make a second adventure like this because, let's be honest here, it would just not pay off at all, as this would also mean a war with Spain as well, which Scotland would not be able to win, especially after losing so much money. So what if all of that changed? What if the Darien Scheme actually succeeded? Or what if Scotland colonized Panama? Let's discuss the disadvantages at first. Well, yes, there are tropical diseases, and they are a thing. We cannot just ignore these diseases. So, tropical diseases, they are a thing and would most likely cause a significant amount of damage. The region itself is also one of the worst regions in the Western Hemisphere, which is why Spain ignored the Darien province. Even until today, it is a very harsh region in the independent Panama. Building infrastructure wouldn't just work that well. The planning and execution of the scheme wasn't that good neither, and there were not enough supplies. And to add to the disaster, there was almost no trade going on due to the English blockade and due to the fact that the natives were not willing to trade with the Scots. What does it mean, and where does it leave us for this scenario? It's pretty easy. New Edinburgh would not be founded in the Darien region, but somewhere else, somewhere closer to today's Cologne, for instance. Why there? Well, when we check a map, we see that Cologne is nowadays very close from the Panama Canal. Before the canal was built, there were already some lakes, and there was enough fresh water coming from small rivers, something that is very essential for a settlement. The climate is also very different in there, and it's not that tropical and not that humid when compared to the Darien region. And when checking also the maps for high risks involving malaria and yellow fever, Cologne is perfectly on the border, and as a result, founding New Edinburgh in that part of Panama would most likely be more successful. Now, you could say that this would be a bad idea because the Spanish could just attack them from Panama City. Yes, but let's also not forget that Panama was a very vulnerable colony at the time. Henry Morgan, a pirate, destroyed the old city of Panama, or Panama Vieja. Another change we would need would also be the English attitude in here. So let's just say the English would rather prefer to see a weaker Spain than a weaker Scotland, and the English would not make a blockade and instead help their neighbor in some ways. Scotland would be able to hold out for longer, and then the War of the Spanish Succession would kick off. Scotland would side with the English, of course, and with that said, Scotland may even be able to gain some more territories. Perhaps all of modern-day Panama and parts of Costa Rica. They would become part of New Caledonia. Trade would start to flourish, more people would be alive, and the scheme would be somewhat of a success. The money wouldn't be totally gone, which would result into one of the first bigger changes in this timeline. No Act of Union. People would be less likely to be corrupted and to accept English bribes in this timeline. Some people would still push for a union with England, even within Scotland, but with a succeeding Darien Scheme, voices for a stronger independent Scotland would be louder. Scotland would remain independent, and England and Scotland would be on the same side in their war against Spain, for instance. But this doesn't mean that things would get less complicated. No, of course not. Scotland and England, they would still have their issues, especially with the Alien Act of 1705. But I believe that Scotland may actually be able to sit it out for a while. England would have too many enemies, and at the same time risking a war with Scotland would not be in their interest. Additionally, the Union of Crowns ends with the death of Anne, and the Scots, they would start to look for the new king. Scotland would not become all of a sudden a republic. Maybe this situation with England could go on for some years or even a few decades. Some wars or little battles would happen here and there, but once Napoleon comes into power, England would quickly abandon any idea close to this Alien Act of 1705, and both kingdoms would improve their relations out of necessity. They would become allies against Napoleon, and with Napoleon's continental system, it would be very silly for England to just block the trade with Scotland and vice versa. With Napoleon gone, Spain would try to win the colonies of Latin America back, but the independence of Latin America would still happen almost like in OTL, only that this time around Gran Colombia and the Central American Union would have less territories. Scotland would silently support and even tolerate these independence movements and securing their colony and its position in Central America. Maybe some more islands they could be grabbed, some more territories could be annexed into New Caledonia, but a further expansion would be impossible and just not be very likely to even happen. New Caledonia would not have a white majority, and many black people would live in New Caledonia as well as natives, and a mix of all of them. Maybe even Indians could be brought as well, and Chinese too. I have no idea what New Caledonia would produce, but New Caledonia would definitely not become an economic powerhouse. Fast forward, the French, the US and Scotland could evolve some good relations. The French would still fail with their version of the Panama Canal, while the US would be able to accomplish it like in OTL. The canal would not be part of the US territory, but the US company would be allowed to operate it in there as the private company and to keep the profits. Some profits they would be made in New Caledonia as well, and we could see more white and European migration happening in New Caledonia. The whole economy would start depending on the canal, but also specialize on shipbuilding, for instance, and other related fields. At some point, with World War I and World War II still happening in one way or another, and colonies getting more and more independent from their motherland, New Caledonia too could see movements that would support more autonomy at least. At the end, New Caledonia would be a developed country with a special emphasis on the canal, shipbuilding, service-based economy, even tourism, and a somewhat respectable agricultural sector. New Caledonia would be independent but keep the Scottish head of state as their own head of state. New Caledonia would become a good ally of the US and of Canada as well. The language and also some cultural links would be very strong between these countries, and that's where we leave it for now. that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.